COVID-19 and the emotional needs. There are various fears swirling around the COVID-19 crisis, and these of course are provoking a burgeoning of stress around work and in society generally. As we've already seen, this becomes a problem especially for management in that long-term stress arousal triggers a range of suboptimum thinking processes and behaviours. Hence, higher stress levels are highly likely to be damaging employee productivity at the moment. Unfortunately, this threat to productivity is happening just when enterprises are fighting for survival and need everyone to be performing at their best. So, what can you do as mental health champion or manager to alleviate this extra threat to business survival? There are a few tips to help businesses overcome the threats to our emotional needs caused by the pandemic. I will go through each of the emotional needs in turn. First off, safety and security. COVID-19 has increased the threats and perceived threats around this particular need for a number of reasons to do with the threat of redundancy, business failure, and of course the disease itself. But in addition, you may find that remote workers are not working in safe environments. For instance, if they are home working, are they sharing cramped accommodation with others also working from home? Is their home equipment adequate? After all, hunched over a laptop for months at a time can cause all kinds of problems such as carpal tunnel syndrome, repetitive strain injury or other stress-related symptoms. So, sooner or later, this may reduce productivity. Obviously, for returning employees, make the place as safe as feasible, but perception is also relevant here. So ensure everyone knows you're doing all you can to make the premises safe. Significantly, where you have remote workers or those perhaps still on furlough, then remember that minimal or zero interaction with management and colleagues can fuel insecurity about redundancy and even group survival. By that I mean, of course, survival of the business. In this respect, it is well worth your while to take time out to explain the difficulties facing the business. But crucially, at the same time, invite feedback and improvement suggestions in an attempt to ease the business problems. Do this even if this joint effort has to be conducted via video conferencing. The value of this approach is that a collaborative effort to help the business recover from lockdown or lost customers or whatever helps meet the employee's need for both personal and group security. Happily, there is a direct payback here because in return for inviting collaboration, you get a heightened sense of loyalty and focus and hopefully some good ideas that you can work with profitably. Autonomy and control. The COVID crisis has seen an array of measures that serve to undermine the need for autonomy and control over our lives. Measures such as mandatory face masks, lockdowns, compulsory furloughs, proposed vaccine passports, social distancing rules, travel restrictions, and so on. Obviously, whether justified or not, these restrictions on our independence and freedom are prone to trigger a stress response, especially, of course, if we disagree with them. However, in this context, another related anxiety can arise, and this is where, say, remote workers feel excluded from crucial decision-making in the office or decision-making that is happening about their area of work and safety, but being taken in their absence. Fortunately, the remedy here is the same as for the security need mentioned just now. I would suggest you involve your people as much as you can in the recovery planning process, as well as any planning of any safety measures. Now, involvement here will help alleviate this stress. It will also encourage people to go with the flow of necessary changes rather than resist them. Emotional connection to the people around us. There are some definite pluses for people doing remote working, there's no doubt about that. Nevertheless, for a lot of employees, it dilutes relationships and disconnects them from the daily companionship of their peer group. We're all beginning to realise that video conferencing is no real substitute for casual physical interaction. So this is another factor to consider when, say, contemplating extending remote working indefinitely. One useful tip here is to try and arrange regular on-site meetups for remote workers so they can catch up with both their usual colleagues and people outside their own immediate team. Status and recognition. The need for status and recognition can also be a casualty of remote working and furlough. In the wider society, this need suffers from a threat to our ability to make decisions about our own health. But regarding the workplace, the earlier recommendation of daily meetings and catch-ups help meet this need. In addition, you will find that remote workers and those anxious about redundancy will benefit especially if you take special time out to give thanks and generous praise for their work and emphasise their ongoing long-term value to the business. Problem solving and meaning. In society generally, these needs will have been impacted by measures that restrict meeting up for meaningful interactions such as church attendance, political activities, community meetings, school PTAs and so on. In this respect, the online experience is hardly adequate. Paradoxically, these two emotional drivers are potentially fantastic resources during a crisis, at least when handled sensitively. Simply put, if you invite people to contribute to the overall survival of the business, you start to meet the needs for problem solving on behalf of the host group, the tribe, as it were. Usefully, this also confers a powerful sense of meaning, as well as helping to meet the need for security and our need to problem solve. By the way, as a result, you will see enthusiasm and energy levels rocket. Conversely, if the employees are not around to ask, do not use this as an excuse to exclude them from group problem solving. Instead, bring remote workers into the dialogue through either video conferencing or for the occasional live meetups. Regularity of routine. I know there will be a few managers who may be surprised to learn that research shows that many home workers are often reluctant to stop work. I admit this reluctance partly arises because of insecurity about employment. But there is another factor at work here, and this is important to know. The fact is that most people, at least in their low stress state, are by nature conscientious and loyal. Hence, given the apparent freedom to decide for themselves, people will usually opt to do the best they can despite the amount of extra time taken. As a result, we see that if there is no artificial cut-off point, work time tends to stretch deeper and deeper into private time. Okay, this might seem a bonus to a lot of hard-pressed businesses, although fair enough, that only works in the short term. The fact remains that over the long term, long hours gradually become stressful, and this inevitably leads to lower productivity and more serious health issues such as chronic anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, and so on. It's wise, therefore, to monitor your employees' work-life balance by using measures such as digital check-ins or during the regular catch-up video conferencing meetings, as mentioned elsewhere. On a similar note, remote working will have disrupted the usual routine of commuting to work. Although this can have some obvious benefits, such as cutting commute time, it may well trigger other problems as well. For instance, walking into the office from the next door room removes the practical opportunity for exercise such as walking to the station or whatever. So advise people not to substitute the commute time for extra work time, but instead suggest they use the time saved to carry out some sort of aerobic exercise and preferably outdoors. The reciprocal need for attention. Generally, this particular need has been hit by anti-COVID measures, especially for certain groups such as care home residents deprived of their family visits and vulnerable people placed in isolation for months on end. At work, the loss of physical interaction with remote working and other social isolation measures is both accentuating the need and making it more difficult to provide. For instance, a video session obscures too many signals of distress, non-verbal communication, body language and so on that would normally alert you to impending problems. The antidote here is for managers to focus more on their people skills and adopt more of a coaching mode. And another relevant point is to take conscious steps to be available to converse with people. So, for instance, conduct daily morning meetings with the team, even if they have to be online. During that time, devote part of the meeting to discussing their day-to-day practical needs, but also listen out for expressed and perhaps hidden concerns that they may be having. I assure you that remote employees will appreciate the attention, so long as you then follow through promptly with any action points to help them. Enjoyment, friendship and fun. Okay, so the ban on social gatherings has had a rather bleak effect on our social life, particularly badly hit our courtship, close friendships and extended family relations. In addition, I would add that remote working and social distancing provoke higher levels of negative emotions such as loneliness and irritability. Again, I would recommend that you make use of online conferencing to enable at least some level of social interaction, and as for other needs, arrange regular live meetups, albeit for small groups. A degree of achievement and a feeling of competence. In the wider community, these needs are at risk due to a number of factors such as the closure of schools and universities, the cutback in training and a drastic decline in healthy social interaction. Otherwise, we need to look at the impact of widespread remote working. Here, managers need to remember to emphasise the giving of regular feedback. All the evidence shows that without regular feedback, employees cannot tell how well or badly they're doing. Unfortunately, this type of zero feedback can soon undermine their sense of competence and probably then also raises doubts as to their safety within the organisation, i.e. it threatens their security need. Once again, the answer is to make frequent use of video communication tools and give regular, ongoing feedback about work performance. Making sure to heap on the positive feedback and express gratitude for the work done. All this helps to keep up morale. Another drawback of remote working is there is less opportunity to ask for help during the usual casual physical interaction of everyday work. In addition, for some employees, they may feel there is a risk having to make a special effort to ask for help as they feel this exposes their weaknesses or at any rate embarrasses them. At which point there is an understandable reticence to stand out too much and own up to not knowing what to do. We have observed this drawback especially with junior employees or new recruits. So take special care to ensure that workers, especially learners and new members of staff, feel free and relaxed to seek help or advice when needed. And this means with both management and fellow colleagues. Privacy. It is increasingly tempting to use modern technology to monitor closely employees' work performance. This is especially the case where remote working is involved. Although you may think this approach is necessary to keep a check on output, if you're not careful, close monitoring of employee activity will rapidly feel intrusive and so conflicts with people's innate need for privacy. As we learned earlier, this need for privacy derives from a need to be ourselves and to take time out to reflect on things so as to consolidate experiences. Regular time out for this sort of introspective rumination is part of our natural defence mechanism against an overload of stress. If we continually ignore it or are prevented from taking time out by intrusive third-party observation or rules, then we gradually experience a build-up of stress in the system. Sooner or later, this will affect natural sleep patterns, work performance, and ultimately our health. Being part of a group or wider community. In some ways, the pandemic has heightened our sense of community as we're all in this together. However, against this is the general banning of community events and general social interaction that is usually the glue that holds communities together. The result is a well-documented rise in loneliness. And of course, there is also in some quarters a growing sense of anger and frustration that our governments are not really listening to individual concerns. Governments in most Western countries have suspended the usual rules of politics and instead use a handful of experts to apply one-size-fits-all measures that impact adversely too many people and too many businesses. Alternative points of view seem to be blotted out of the group discussion. Unfortunately, this aspect of the crisis becomes a threat to our sense of being part of a benign host group, there to protect our security interests. A similar problem can occur in organisational life unless you are careful. For instance, safety measures designed to help the situation may be considered too intrusive and unnecessary by some people, but in direct contrast, some others will find the same measures far too inadequate. In other words, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. The best way to meet these conflicting arguments is to take more time and effort to reassure people you are taking safety measures seriously. Notably, this should involve extensive ongoing consultation with all employees so as to alleviate any rational or irrational fears about infection, contamination, inadequate measures, and so on. But in addition, take extra care to explain the difficulties the business faces. Crucially, follow this up by inviting ongoing feedback and ideas about both the business and health safety problems. The best antidote to a weakened sense of community is to create a team effort to help the group survive. Such an initiative will compensate for the other threats to this need and help meet the needs for both personal and group safety. In addition, such an approach will help satisfy a lot of other needs as well. As a result, you will benefit directly from employees who then have a heightened sense of loyalty, conscientiousness and focus, all channeled towards group survival. A brief point about Zoom selfies. Recent research shows that attending Zoom meetings with a little selfie on creates a certain amount of tension in the viewer. After all, we're not used to watching ourselves talking, and except for those narcissists amongst us, it is not necessarily a pleasant sight anyway. After continual exposure, the research found that viewing yourself continually during meetings becomes mildly stressful and as a result unduly tiring to the viewer. So best turn off the selfie during online meetings. Okay, to sum up then, during this current crisis, the key factor to remember is that by working to meet people's emotional needs, you can reduce their stress levels and so have better access to a range of innate resources and superb problem-solving faculties. In return, these resources give you the very means to alleviate the problems you have at hand. So that leads us on to the next topic. In the next section, section 3, we will look at these innate resources in more detail and see how we can make use of them to help our colleagues when they are getting stressed, or how to help prevent the stress from happening in the first place. So, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.